It was a Saturday morning, 8 months after Grandpa died, and I was on my hands and knees scrubbing the grout between his kitchen tiles. Not because anyone asked me to, because the house needed it, and I was the one who showed up. The way I always showed up on Saturdays: rubber gloves, hair pulled back, a podcast running low through the old Bluetooth speaker he kept on the windowsill above the sink. The linoleum had a crack near the stove he'd patched with electrical tape, twice. The hallway behind me was yellow, the kind of yellow that catches afternoon light and makes everything feel like a Sunday. I had nowhere to be. I was just there, the way I'd always just been there. And then my phone buzzed. A photo. My parents at an airport gate, carry-on bags at their feet, my mother in a wide-brimmed sun hat she definitely did not own the last time I saw her. My father standing beside her with the particular grin of a man who believed he had just gotten away with something. Underneath the photo she had typed, "We're heading to Cancun. Took care of the house situation. Don't worry about coming by anymore. Love you." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the tile, pulled my glove back on, and kept scrubbing. Because I already knew. I had already handled it. And the only thing left to do was wait for them to figure that out for themselves. Let me back up. My grandfather taught me how to read a deed when I was 19. Not because I asked, because he believed you should understand the ground you stand on before someone tries to pull it out from under you. He set the document on his kitchen table between 2 cups of coffee, his black, mine with too much sugar, and traced his finger along the property lines like he was reading a map to somewhere important. "This is yours," he said. "Not the house. Not yet. The knowledge." He showed me where the legal description began, where the grantor's name went, where a signature could transfer everything a person had ever built into someone else's hands in 11 minutes at a county recorder's office. I was a sophomore paralegal student who still kept her textbooks in milk crates. I didn't understand why he was teaching me this. But my grandfather had a way of preparing you for storms you couldn't see yet. His kitchen smelled like pine sol and black coffee. The window above the sink looked out over a 1/4 acre of land his father had bought in 1961 for $4,200. The house itself wasn't large. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, that hallway painted yellow that caught the afternoon light in a way that made everything feel like a Sunday. He lived there for 53 years. I scrubbed that kitchen floor every other weekend for the last 4 of them. My sister Lily is 3 years younger than me. She teaches 2nd grade. She has the kind of patience with other people's children that she absolutely did not develop by having patient parents. She learned to bake from Grandpa. She still carries his chocolate chip cookie recipe folded in her wallet like a talisman. I'm the one who became a paralegal, who read Grandpa's paperwork when his eyesight started going, who sat with the estate attorney for 4 hours the week after the funeral, going over every document line by line. We arrived at who we are through the same kitchen table, through the same man. We just carried different things away from it. My parents visited on holidays, sometimes. My mother would call the week before Thanksgiving to ask what Grandpa wanted. She never called to ask how he was doing. My father would shake his hand at the door, sit in the living room, check his phone, and leave before dessert. They lived 40 minutes away. 40 minutes. I lived an hour and 12, and I was there every other Saturday with a mop and a bag of groceries. That's not a complaint. That's a ledger. When Grandpa's arthritis got bad enough that he couldn't open his own pill bottles, I drove out on Tuesday evenings to sort his medications into a weekly organizer. 7 rows, 4 slots each. It took me 20 minutes and saved him the $85 a week homemade my mother said was too expensive, from a woman who had just booked a spa weekend in Sedona for $1,100. When the roof leaked in March, I found the contractor. When the water heater failed in August, I paid the $1,247 replacement. When he fell in the bathroom and needed a grab bar installed, I drove to the hardware store on my lunch break. My parents sent a card. I didn't keep score. That was the first brick. Grandpa died on a Wednesday in October, quietly, the way he did everything. The hospice nurse called me at 6:14 in the morning. I was already dressed for work. I set my coffee mug on the counter very carefully. Like if I placed it gently enough, the morning might still be ordinary, and drove the hour and 12 minutes without turning on the radio. The house was exactly the same. Pine saw, electrical tape, yellow hallway. Except the kitchen table was empty. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. I thought about what he used to say when he caught me standing still in a room. You're not lost. You're just deciding which direction. I didn't cry then. I didn't cry for a few days. There are people who make you feel like everything will be okay simply by existing. And when they stop existing, the feeling doesn't leave all at once. It leaves in pieces, quietly, in the middle of ordinary things. In the middle of scrubbing a kitchen floor. In the middle of a Tuesday. The will was read the following week. It was simple. The house, the land, the savings account, everything went to me and Lily equally. His granddaughters, the ones who showed up. My mother's face didn't change when the attorney read our names. That's how I knew she had already planned what to say. She leaned over to my father before we'd even left the office and whispered something I was clearly meant to hear. We'll sort this out. 3 words. I didn't argue. That was the mortar. The calls started 11 days after the funeral. My mother's voice had that careful sweetness she reserved for conversations where she wanted something without saying so directly. Sweetheart, your father and I have been thinking, and we think the smartest thing for everyone would be to let us handle the house. Keep it in the family. Save you girls the hassle. The house my grandfather left to us. The house she hadn't cleaned, hadn't paid for, hadn't visited on any of the Saturdays that mattered. I listened to 3 voicemails before I called Lily. She stepped out of her classroom to take it. I could hear her second graders in the background, the particular sound of small children who've been asked to be quiet and are trying their best. Then I heard the soft bubbling of her classroom fish tank. She keeps it running even at home, she'd told me once. It helps her think. They're going to try something, I said. A beat? The fish tank? I know, she said. What do we do? We get ahead of it. She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone uncertain. The quiet of someone organizing. Okay, she said. 1 word. But I heard 30 years inside it. The fish tank kept bubbling. Then I called our estate attorney. I started on a Tuesday. Not because anything had happened. Not because my mother had called again, or my father had texted about being reasonable. I started on a Tuesday because that's when the county recorder's office is least busy, and I needed to be in and out before anyone in my family had reason to wonder where I was. I had already been keeping a file, call logs, screenshots of text messages, a note my mother had left on the house door that I had photographed and dated. I'm a paralegal. Documentation is not a hobby for me. It is a reflex. The county recorder's office smelled like old carpet and toner. I brought the original deed, the will, my ID, and the transfer form I'd filled out the night before at Grandpa's kitchen table. The same table, the same pen. The clerk stamped it without a single question. 11 minutes. That's how long it took to make the house legally, irrevocably ours. I walked out into the parking lot and sat in my car and didn't start the engine for 6 minutes. Not because I was scared, because somewhere in those 11 minutes, standing at that counter with his deed in my hands, I had heard his voice. The way he used to say, "You're not lost, you're just deciding." And I had thought, I know which direction, Grandpa. I know exactly. He wasn't there to know I'd listened. That was the hardest part. 6 minutes. Then I turned the key. I called the county recorder's office and put a flag on the property. Any attempted transfer would require direct contact with me before proceeding. I changed the locks on all 3 exterior doors and installed a Ring doorbell camera that fed directly to my phone. I went to Grandpa's bank and closed his account, transferring everything into a new one under my name and Lily's. Different bank, different city. I called his accountant, his insurance agent, and the estate attorney. I told each of them the same thing. If anyone contacts you about this property, about any accounts, about any documents, call me first. Not my mother, not my father, me. I didn't tell my parents I had done any of this. I didn't warn them, I didn't hint, I didn't leave a single trace of what I'd built. The fortress was finished in 4 days. It cost me $147.63 in hardware, $35 in filing fees, and 4 tanks of gas. $200 to protect a $500,000 legacy. And then I waited. That's the part no one tells you about. The waiting. You build the walls, and you check the locks, and you file the papers. And then you sit in a quiet house that smells like pine sol and coffee. And you listen to the ceiling fan make slow circles above your head. 1 rotation. 2. 3. 4. I stopped counting at 4. My mother called 3 more times that week. Each message was a little sweeter than the last, which meant she was getting a little more desperate. My father texted once, "Your mother is very upset. Please call her back." I didn't explain why I wasn't calling back. I didn't tell them what I'd done. I didn't reassure them or confront them or give them anything at all to push against. Because here's what I understood, sitting at that kitchen table with the yellow light coming through the window. You can't siege a fortress if you don't know it exists. You can't breach a wall if you think you're walking through an open field. Revenge requires an audience. Protection just requires a lock. So I sat, and I waited, and I let them make their plans, without knowing that every door they planned to walk through was already sealed. Then they stopped calling. In my experience, when someone who has been calling you repeatedly suddenly goes quiet, it's not because they gave up. It's because they found a different angle. The mobile notary arrived on a Thursday. I was making pasta. Not because I'm some kind of calm, unshakable person who cooks during a crisis. I was making pasta because it was Thursday, and I was hungry, and the water was already boiling. That's how ordinary the evening was supposed to be. My phone buzzed at 6:47. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "I'm outside the property on Caldwell. I've been asked to notarize a transfer. There's a flag on the deed. Wanted to reach out before proceeding." The flag had done its job. I turned off the stove, dried my hands on a dish towel, and typed back, "Don't notarize anything. Give me about 10 minutes. His name was Gerald. Gray polo shirt, leather portfolio. He'd pulled the county records before the appointment, standard practice. And when he saw the verification hold with my number attached, he called instead of showing up. He was a careful man, the kind who reads before he stamps. My mother had spent 2 quiet weeks finding a different kind of notary, the mobile kind, the kind who comes to you, who are sometimes less careful about verification when the fee is right. She had gotten a copy of a deed transfer form. She had a plan to list the house before Lily and I realized what had happened, use the proceeds to pay off a credit card, and fund something she had already half booked. I know this because of what came out afterward. I set down my fork, walked to the kitchen table, and opened the drawer with the folder, the one labeled House Documents, in my own handwriting. Inside, the recorded deed transfer, stamped and dated, the new account statements, the will, the property tax records already updated in our names. Copies of everything filed in 11 minutes on a Tuesday. I set the folder on the table and turned it toward Gerald. "The property was transferred 4 days before today's date," I said. "Legally recorded. The person who requested this notarization has no legal claim to this property. If she attempts to file any document transferring ownership, that would constitute forgery and filing of a false instrument. Class D felony. 1 to 5 years. Gerald read the deed, the filing receipt, the will. He closed his leather portfolio. "I'm not going to notarize anything," he said. "I know," I said. He left. I went back to making pasta. The water had boiled over while I was talking. There was a small puddle on the stove. I wiped it up with the same dish towel, refilled the pot, and waited for it to boil again. Some things you have to start over. Some things you just have to wait for. Gerald called me the next afternoon. Careful, professional. He told me the woman who'd hired him had contacted his office, that she was not happy with his report, that he had told her exactly what I'd shown him. I thanked him. He wished me luck. I didn't need it. What I needed was already built. 40 minutes later, my mother called. Her voice had lost its sweetness entirely. "What did you do to the house?" I didn't answer. She called 4 more times that evening, each message shorter than the last, and louder. By the 5th, she wasn't asking questions anymore. She was making threats. "Your father and I have every right to that property. We're going to contest the will. You can't just..." The voicemail cut her off at 3 minutes. So she called my father. My father called the estate attorney, the same one I'd already spoken to. The attorney told him what I'd told Gerald. Legally transferred, fully recorded, any competing document would constitute a felony. My father hung up. My mother called the bank, the old bank, the one where Grandpa's savings used to sit. Used to. The account had been closed for 6 days. The teller couldn't tell her where the money went. Privacy policy. She called the accountant, directed to me. She called the insurance agent. Same answer. Every door she tried was already locked. Every professional she contacted already had my paperwork. Every path she thought was open had been sealed on a Tuesday afternoon when nothing bad had happened yet. I didn't make a single call that week. Didn't send a single text. Didn't confront, threaten, or explain. The fortress did the work. My parents walked into walls I'd built before they even knew there was a building. And then came Cancún. You would have said no. Probably, I said, but that would have been our answer to give. They came home 6 days later. The trip had been 10 nights, but the resort card was declined on day 6. The credit card they had been counting on a cash infusion to pay off. They had to fly home early. I heard this from a cousin. I didn't reach out. I waited. My father tried one more time. He drove to the house on a Saturday morning. I saw him on the Ring camera, standing at the front door, trying the old key. It didn't fit. He stood there for a moment, then moved to the side door. Same key, same result. He looked at the door, then at the lock, then at the camera. He stood there longer than necessary. Long enough that I wondered what he was thinking. Whether he was doing the math, finally, on how long she had known. How many steps ahead she had been. How many walls had been built while he was making other plans. Then he walked back to his car. The shoulders of a man who had run out of angles. I didn't go to the door. I was watching from Grandpa's kitchen table. Lily and I talked 3 times that week. Long calls, late into the night. The kind we hadn't had since we were teenagers. We talked about Grandpa. About what we wanted to do with the house. About the tomato seeds she'd found in a coffee can in the garage, and whether they'd still grow, and whether it was worth trying. She said she wanted to move in. She said it quietly, like she was asking permission from someone who wasn't in the room. I said yes before she finished. She moved in on a Saturday. 2 suitcases and a bag of groceries. She didn't ask if she could stay. She just carried her things through the front door. The door with the new lock. The lock I had given her a key to. And set the groceries on Grandpa's kitchen counter. I told Mom I'm staying here, she said. What did she say? She said I was making a mistake. Lily set down her bag. She didn't explain herself, or argue, or soften it. She had already decided. 2 weeks later, our parents came to the house on a Wednesday evening. I watched on my phone from 12 miles away. My mother in a different hat. My father with his hands in his jacket pockets. both of them on the porch of a house they no longer had access to, pressing a doorbell that now sent alerts to my phone instead of ringing inside an empty room. Lily was inside. She had been painting the hallway. She opened the door. I wasn't there for that conversation. She told me about it later, sitting at Grandpa's kitchen table, her hands still faintly yellow from the paint. She had matched the color from the lid of an old can she found in the garage, the exact yellow Grandpa had chosen when he first moved in. She said our father did most of the talking. He said they'd made a mistake. He said they'd been under financial pressure. He said he hoped this didn't have to change things between them. Lily listened to all of it. Then she said, very simply, "I need you to go." Our mother started to say something. Our father touched her arm. "We can talk later," Lily said, "when I'm ready. But right now, I need you to go." And they went. She called me right after. I was still watching the ring feed. I saw them walk to the car, saw my father's shoulders, saw my mother look back once at the house, at the yellow hallway visible through the open door, before she got in. "How are you?" I asked. "I'm okay." A pause. The fish tank, soft in the background. "I'm actually okay." "The hallway looks good," I said. I could see the flash of it through the camera. She laughed. A real laugh, a little surprised. "It really does," she said. I had spent a long time wondering if Lily and I would ever feel like the ones who got to stay. Like we had finally come home to something that was ours. That was the moment I stopped wondering. There's a particular grief in watching people who hurt you be happy about hurting you. Not because their happiness matters more than your pain, but because it clarifies something you might have spent years trying to avoid clarifying. Some people are not going to change. Not because they can't, but because they don't want to badly enough to pay the cost. My parents were not bad people in the way that keeps you up at night. They were bad in a smaller, more ordinary way. The way of people who have always reached for what they want first and called it necessity afterward. The way of people who mistake proximity for entitlement, who look at something their own children built and protected and feel deserving of a share of it simply by virtue of being related. I had spent a long time being sad about that. I was done being sad about it. My mother called once more, 3 weeks later. Her voicemail was almost gentle. She didn't mention the property or the money. She said, "I hope you're happy with what you've done." I was. Not happy in the way she meant it. Not satisfied or smug or vindicated. Happy the way you feel when you realize the roof doesn't leak anymore, when the doors close properly, when the people inside are the ones who are supposed to be there. I could have filed charges. The notary statement, the call log, the flag transfer attempt. Any of it would have been enough. Class D felony. The attorney told me I had a strong case. I didn't file. Not because I forgave them. Not because I'm a better person. Because filing charges would have been building a weapon. And I wasn't building a weapon. I was building a home. There's a Ring camera on the front door now. I check it sometimes. Not because I'm afraid, but because it comforts me to see the porch empty. The door closed. The locks holding. Lily is in the house. The hallway is yellow. The same yellow Grandpa chose 53 years ago. Matched from the lid of an old paint can by the person he always meant to have it. The tomato seeds she found in that coffee can in the garage are growing in the back garden. She figured she'd see what happened. She planted his seeds without knowing what they were. They grew anyway. The developer is still interested in the back parcel. We're still deciding. Our parents call occasionally. We call back when we feel like it. The relationship is what it is. A door that stays mostly closed, opened only when we choose to, on our terms. 3 keys. That's still the distribution list. My grandfather taught me how to read a deed when I was 19. He set it on the kitchen table between 2 cups of coffee, his black, mine with too much sugar, and traced the property lines with his finger like he was reading a map. "This is yours," he said. He was right. He didn't do it because he thought his daughter might one day try to take it from us. He did it because he believed in knowing things. He believed in being prepared. He believed that understanding how the world worked was the best protection against the ways it could go wrong. He believed you should understand the ground you stand on before someone tries to pull it out from under you. He said that to me when I was 19, sitting at his kitchen table, drinking coffee with too much sugar. I didn't know then that I was being taught how to hold on to something. I thought he was teaching me paperwork. I changed those locks on a Tuesday afternoon when nothing bad had happened yet. That's the whole story. Everything else was just waiting. If you're sitting with something like this right now, a family member who's been asking too many questions about finances, a parent who mentions your savings in conversations where it doesn't belong, a sibling who keeps finding reasons to be involved in decisions that aren't theirs, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to protect what is yours, quietly, legally, completely, without announcing it and without apologizing for it. Document everything. Know the paperwork. Find the professional who can show you what protection actually looks like in practical terms. Do it before you need it. Not in the crisis, but before it, when things are still calm, when you could almost convince yourself there's no reason to bother. That is the reason to bother. And if someone sends you a photo from an airport looking pleased with themselves, let them have the photo. They'll figure out the rest soon enough. So let me ask you something. If someone tried to take the one thing that mattered most to you, would you have built the fortress? Or would you have opened the door and tried to talk it out? I still think about that sometimes. I'd like to know where you stand. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. I tell stories like this every week. Stories about women who chose protection over revenge and built something no one could take from them. I keep thinking about that Saturday morning. Rubber gloves. A podcast. The crack in the linoleum. The yellow hallway behind me. I was scrubbing the floor of a house that was already mine in a way my mother didn't understand yet. And when the phone buzzed with that photo, the sun hat, the grin, took care of the house situation. I put it face down and kept scrubbing. Not because I wasn't angry, I was, but I had already done the work. I had already built the thing. And there is a particular kind of quiet that comes from knowing the walls are standing. Not the quiet of someone who has given up, but the quiet of someone who has nothing left to prove. My grandfather used to say, the most important thing about protecting what you love is that you have to do it before you need to. Not in the crisis, before it. When the sky is still clear and there's no emergency, and you could almost convince yourself there's no reason to bother. He changed that for me, not by saying it, but by doing it. By spreading a deed on a kitchen table when I was 19 and saying, "This is yours," before anyone had tried to take it. He trusted me with the knowledge before I knew I would need it. I think about that a lot. Not in the aching way I did right after he died. In the way you carry someone who is gone. Their voice in your ear when you're making a decision. Their hands in your hands when you're doing something they taught you. I was standing in a county recorder's office when I heard him, holding his deed, 11 minutes from making it ours. I know which direction, Grandpa. He taught me well. And the quietest thing in this whole story isn't a lock. It's a 19-year-old girl sitting at a kitchen table, not knowing yet that she's being trusted with everything. Until next time.